Hey, what's going on, guys? So welcome back to another video. So in this video, we're going to be creating this cool digital clock, which has, apart from the time being shown over here, has the functionality of showing the day, and also has this greeting functionality that when it's morning, it's going to say good morning. When it's afternoon, it's going to say good afternoon, and evening as good evening. Now to build this, we're going to be using HTML5, CSS3, and then JavaScript. For the designing in CSS, we're going to be using a bit of Flexbox just to get everything on the center and have everything laid out properly. As you can see, the clock looks kind of 3D. So to get this effect, we're going to be using box shadow. And now for the JavaScript, I'll keep everything as simple as I can so that even if you have no idea of JavaScript, I'll assume that you have a bit of programming knowledge. It should be good enough for you to build this. Now, without any further ado, let's jump to the text editor and start coding this digital clock. Okay, so I have added the basic boiler template of the HTML. So I have added the title, and then I have also linked my style.css file and then script.js file. And then the next thing that we want to do is grab the Arbitron font family. So you can just go to Google Font and type out Arbitron. And then the thing that I took was this medium 500. So I've just clicked on here and this is what it appears. So you can take the link, you can add this in your HTML file. But what I did was I grabbed this import and then I've just added this in my style.css file. And then after you have imported that, so what are you going to do? I have just added the font family Arbitron to everything, meaning that every text that appears on the website would have a font family of Arbitron. And in case this doesn't work, now sans serif would take its place. And in my CSS file, I have also added margin and padding to be 0 because I do not want anything to have by default any kind of margin or padding. So I have just made those to go 0. And then I've added box sizing to border box. Now in the HTML, the first thing that we want to do is have a clock class, and then this clock would contain everything that's going to be inside the clock. The next thing that we want to do is add the time. Now this time would have every hour, minute, and second hands inside this. So the first thing that we want to do is add spans. Now these spans would be the hours, minutes, and seconds. So I have added the spans. Now each span has its own class. So this has hours, this has minutes, and this has seconds, just so we can grab onto each of these in our JavaScript. Now, right after this hour span, we have added the span with a semicolon, just because that we have that semicolon right after hours and minutes. Now when I save, this is what it looks like. Now since we already have the font family activated, so this would take on to the Arbitron font family. Now let's go to our style.css file and let's start styling this. Now the first thing that we want to do is we're going to style the body, and we're going to have a background of 1 F 2 5 2B. Now when I save, this is what it looks like. And we're going to have a color of 1A BC 9C. Alright. And then let's add a height of 100 viewport height and a width of 100 viewport width. And the next thing that we want to add is display flags, so that everything is flexed, and then flex direction to column. Now by default, flex direction is row, but we want to have it as column. And so I'll just add here one last thing, that is H2, and this H2 would have hey sir, and then a span with the greeting class, and then this would contain the greeting, and I'll just add here the exclamation. Okay, now we want to have this the center. So I'll just write justify content center and align items center. Now this should bring everything to the center. And now as you can see that these two are kind of attached together, which we don't want. So we want to separate these. So I just access the clock div, and then here what I want to do is add position relative, and then add a margin bottom of 50 pixels. And I also want to add a font size of 30 pixels. Okay. Now let's add the box shadow so that it has a bit of 3D look. Now box shadow I want to add is 10 pixels, 10 pixels, and 10 pixels, RGBA. So these two are basically the X and Y coordinate, and this is basically the amount you want to have them spread out. Now as you can see, so this looks kind of weird. Now what we're going to do is add a padding of 20 pixels so that all the text have 20 pixels of gapping from the edge of the box. Okay, so once we have this done, now what we're going to do is add the second layer of this. And now this time the coordinate would be minus 10 pixels, and 10 pixels. And let's lower this to minus 6, and this to minus 6 as well. Okay, and this would be a bit wide, 0.1. Now when I save, now this is starting to look like our project one. Now let's add border radius of 10 pixels. Okay, so we are done with the designing. Now there are a few things that we should add. Is we want a min width of 300 pixels, and we want to have text align to center and cursor as pointer. Now the reason we have the text align center is because when we have the functionality to click and have this change to any day, we want to appear that day in the center. So we want that to appear in the center, and then we want to have this cursor as pointer when we hover over it. So let's add this day. So here, right under seconds, I'm going to add a span and add a class of day. And here by default, I'll just add Saturday. Okay, and I would like to also add a span which would have the period, that either it's PM or AM. Now I'll just add here AM. All right, and then what we want to do is have this period have a bit of margin. So margin left 20 pixels. Okay, now since we don't want this day to be shown, so we can just add here a height class, and this height would have a display none property, and now we can just add this over here. All right, let's reduce this to 10 pixels. Okay, now this is our basic CSS. Now all that's left is to add the real functionality via our JavaScript. Okay, so I have added everything that's needed from the DOM, and I have stored each individual elements in respective variables. Now the thing that might seem weird is this weekdays variable. Now this weekdays variable contains the days of the weeks, and the reason we have this you would understand in just a moment. The first thing that we want to do is add an event listener to this clock, so that whenever we click, so we want to have that swap changing between this time, this clock, and the day it shows. So for this I'll just write clock, and then I'll add an event listener. So we want to listen for a click, and then I'm going to use an arrow function, and this would have time.classList. Now since this time is the div time, which is responsible to hold everything here, now class list dot toggle, and we want to toggle the height. So whenever you click here, this is going to hide this time. Okay, as you can see, when you click, the time gets removed. Now the next thing that we want to do is bring out the day. So to bring out the day, we can write class day.classList.toggle and height. Now since we have already added the height in our day here, so whenever we click, this gonna, now since it already has this height class, when you click over here, this height would get removed. Now I'll just copy this, remove it from here, and then just bring it over here. Okay, now this div is out of the time. Now whenever you click, the day should pop up. Okay, now since I have just added Saturday here, so it shows Saturday, but we're gonna have the functionality where it's gonna show the real date of that specific day. Okay, the next thing that we want to do is have the clock functionality. For this, I'll add a function and I'll call it change time. And this, the first thing that we want to do is have a variable age, which would grab the hours of the day, date, and then we want to get the hours. Then we want to have a variable for minutes, variable for seconds, and then variable for the day. Okay, now since we already have everything that we need from the day, now what we want to do, we just want these to get appended here. So we don't want these zeros to be shown. Instead, we want this hour, this minute, and this second to be shown here. So for this, what we can do is we can add hours, which would point to this zero. And what we want to do, we're going to change the inner HTML to H. Similarly, we're going to change the minutes, inner HTML to M, seconds, inner HTML to S, day, inner HTML to weekdays, and here inside I'm going to pass date. So since this returns a number, now depending on that number, we want to get that specific element of the week. Now that's the reason why we have this weekdays as an array of days of the week. Now if I save, this wouldn't have any impact because we still haven't called this function. So to call this function, what we want to do is add a variable interval, and we want to have a set interval so that we want this function to be called after each second so that the time gets updated every time this gets called. So set interval. Now the function that we want to call is change time, and then the duration or the interval is 1000, meaning that 1 second. Now if I save, as you can see, it shows the time. Okay. Alright, so now there are a couple of things that we should add so that this has a bit more better functionality. The first thing that we want to add is the greeting. So I'll just go above this and it's right here. If age is greater than or equal to 12 and is less than 17, meaning that since in a day we have 24 hours, so from 12 o'clock to 5 o'clock, if that is the time, we're going to have greeting.innerHTML as good afternoon. Now I'll just take this, copy, and then I'll paste it here. Instead of if, I'll just write else if, and here instead of 12, I'll just put here 17, and here I'll just put 24. And so for this time, I want it to say as evening, or else I want this greeting inner HTML to be good morning. Now as you can see that it is 12:45 a.m. and thus it says, hey sir, good morning. Now if the time were around like 6:45 or 6 something p.m., somewhere around the evening part, now this would have said good evening. Okay. Now the thing that we want to add is the period. So as you can see, by default it has this AM stuff, but we do not want this, so we want it to change according to the time. So what we're going to do is, if age is greater than 12, then we're going to have the period dot inner HTML to be equal to PM. Now, to have these individual functionality, you can have different functions, but I'll just keep it as simple as I can, so I'll just add it in this change time function itself. Now, if this is not the case, what do you want to do? You want to have the period dot inner HTML as AM. Now, if I save, you wouldn't see any changes because it was showing AM, and it would still show AM because that's what it should show. Now, the last thing that we want to add is, there's two things basically that we need to add. The first is, we don't want this to be showing a 24-hour clock. We want it to have a 12-hour clock, meaning that if it's 1 o'clock afternoon, we don't want this to show as 13 p.m. or something like that. So we want to have it as 1 o'clock p.m. and not 13 p.m. So for this, what we want to do is if age is greater than or equal to 12. So if this is so, if age is greater than 12, then what we want to do is age equals age minus 12. Now what it would do is, when the time would be more than 12, let's say it's 13, which is 1 o'clock, now this age would reduce 12 from it, and that's going to give us 1 o'clock. Okay. Now you wouldn't see any changes because it's 12 o'clock midnight stuff, so you wouldn't see the change, but you can see the change once you have the time around, like somewhere around the afternoon, so you can see the change then. Now there is one last thing that I want to add, that is, now as you can see that since it's 12, it is showing here 0, which we do not want. So even though we want it to show 0, but we want each individual hour, minute, or second hands to have their respective value as a double number. So we want this to have double zeros instead of one single zero. So to have that, what we're going to do is have this. Now what it does, first it basically checks if age is greater than 10 or not. So if it's less than 10, then what it's going to do, it's going to add a 0, and then whatever age value you have, which is a number, it's going to convert that to a string, and then this would be a string now. The same would be for the minutes. If it's less than 10, it's going to convert that to a string and then add a 0 and then have everything as a string, and that's what it's going to display. And then same would be for the seconds. Now if I save, instead of 1 0, you have 2 zeros, and then if your minute hand goes somewhere in single digit, it wouldn't show that single digit. It would have now double digit. The first one would be 0 then. So I hope you guys like this video. So if you're new to the channel, subscribe for more such content and turn on the notification bell to remain updated whenever I post a new video. So now I have a couple of videos on the screen. You can check those videos out. So I'll meet you there. Thank you for watching this video.